Can an unfair sanction define the future of a Formula One championship? What happened in Brazil 2025 between Oscar Piastri, Kimi Antonelli, and the FIA has put the legitimacy of the racing rules in check. But was it really Piastri's fault? Or are we facing the beginning of a rebellion by the teams against the race direction? It all started with what seemed like a simple maneuver on a race restart. Lap 6 of the 2025 Brazilian Grand Prix was underway after a brief period under safety car. The peloton grouped together, the track cooled, and the margins of error disappeared. In these conditions, every driver knows that it is a critical opportunity. Either you gain ground or it is taken away from you. And Oscar Piastri understood it perfectly. On the approach to Turn 1 at Interlagos, one of the most iconic and treacherous areas on the calendar, the Australian driver executed a determined move. He launched himself inside to try to surpass Kimi Antonelli. On the outside, Charles Leclerc was also looking to position himself. What was generated at that moment was a triple convergence. 3 cars, 3 trajectories, a single vertex. It's one of those situations where everything is defined in milliseconds. Piastri braked late but not recklessly. He took a defensive line at the limit but valid. However, it briefly locked its front wheels when reaching the braking point, an action that may visually appear uncontrolled, but was not. The car regained grip before the apex and its trajectory remained within the limits of the asphalt. This is key, because according to the rules, what matters is not whether you block but whether you can control the car. And Piastri did it. The problem came when Antonelli, from the center of the track, closed his path towards the apex. Leclerc, for his part, maintained the outside line. Space began to disappear. Physics prevailed. Piastri was trapped between 2 converging cars with no room for escape. The result was multiple contact that took Leclerc out of the race immediately, left damage to Antonelli's car and ruined Piastri's potential to fight for a podium. The commissioners did not take long to act. After reviewing the data and images, they determined that Piastri had not reached the point of legal coexistence, according to the 2025 guidelines. His front axle was not at the height of Antonelli's mirror when reaching the apex. That reason alone was enough to consider him completely responsible for the incident. 10 seconds penalty and 2 points on your super license. Case closed, at least for the FIA. But the real problem started right after the checkered flag was dropped. Because it wasn't just a penalty. It was about what that decision symbolized. For many within the paddock, it was a blind application of a rule that ignores the context. The real dynamics between 3 cars in a corner that has seen hundreds of controversial maneuvers in history. An absolute punishment in an absolutely complex situation. Criticism was triggered not only from McLaren, but from neutral voices. Charles Leclerc, who had been left out because of that incident, surprised everyone by publicly stating that he did not believe Piastri was the only one to blame. He said Antonelli closed himself off as if Oscar had never existed, making it clear that responsibility should have been shared. That was the turning point. Because when even the driver who was most harmed questions the sanction, then something doesn't add up. And what seemed like a racing incident became a trigger. In a declaration of principles. In the lit fuse of a bigger bomb, the conflict between what the drivers do on the track and how the FIA interprets it from the desks. The first big fire of 2025 had just started. Piastri Stella's reaction was not a simple response to the media. It was a covert declaration of war. A direct indictment at the heart of the FIA sanctions system. There was no uncontrolled anger on the Italian engineer's face. There was something much more powerful, calculated deception. The kind that is only spoken when someone feels that an invisible line of justice has been crossed. Stella, in her usual calm and methodical tone, began by acknowledging that McLaren accepts the rules. But he immediately dismantled the reasoning behind Piastri's sanction as if he were taking apart an engine piece by piece. He said that although Piastri briefly locked the wheels, he never lost actual control of the car, who drew the curve within the limits. That it was not launched recklessly, as the regulations state, to consider it an illegal maneuver. And that was where he introduced the first missile. According to his interpretation, Piastri's maneuver was controlled and measurable, while Antonelli's reaction, closing the trajectory towards the apex with 2 cars clearly present, one on the inside, one on the outside, was at least as questionable. In McLaren's eyes, responsibility should have been shared, or in any case mitigated. But it wasn't. Stella went even further. He said the stewards completely ignored the dynamics between 3 cars in the middle of a corner, something that should never be evaluated with a binary rule like the rearview mirror. Because this guide, designed for 2-car scenarios, does not contemplate the real chaos of a safety car start, with cold tires, accumulated pressure, and limited visibility. The message underlying his words was clear. The problem is not just the sanction. The problem is the system. Because if the rules do not allow a talented pilot like Piastri, who made a legitimate maneuver to the extent possible, to be evaluated with contextual criteria, then those rules are not fulfilling their function of fair refereeing. And that not only affects McLaren but the entire sport. But perhaps the most powerful thing was its closure. When Stella said that while McLaren respected the stewards' decisions, they could not remain silent when those decisions seemed misaligned with the competitive spirit of the sport. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a warning. As if to say, today it was Piastri. Tomorrow it could be anyone. That intervention left the paddock frozen. Because no one expects the boss of a team with a real chance at the title to speak with that clarity so early in the season. But Stella did it. Because for him, what is at stake is not just the points lost in Brazil. It is the competitive integrity of the entire championship. And McLaren, it seems, is unwilling to look the other way. Behind all the controversy in Brazil, there is not only an incident on the track. What has truly unleashed this storm is the tool with which the FIA intends to deliver justice, the so-called driving standards guidelines. These rules, introduced and reformulated in 2025 in response to the scandals of previous years, were born with a very clear promise: to eliminate ambiguity, avoid contradictory decisions, give stewards a concrete framework to judge incidents uniformly. In theory, it was the ideal solution to clean up the FIA's reputation. But in practice, these guidelines are becoming a steel cage enclosing human judgment. Instead of providing clarity, they are stifling the ability to analyze what is really happening on the track. Because they are built on mathematical logic applied to a sport that is rarely exact. In the case of Brazil, this logic is summarized in one sentence. The front axle must be at least at the height of the rival car's mirror before the apex, so that the attacker has the right to space. It is a precise rule, Claire, and yet deeply problematic. Because it reduces a three-dimensional context with multiple actors, speeds, lines, and changing surfaces to a single visual reference. What happens when there are three cars entering the same curve? What happens if one of them blocks momentarily but can still hold the line? What if the car from the outside makes a sudden movement to close, as happened with Antonelli? The guidelines are unanswerable. They only require a static position of the front axle. Spot. The Piastri case has lit the fuse, but there is more to come. Because this is not a discussion about an isolated sanction. It's an uncomfortable conversation about how the sport is being governed. On whether the rules are protecting the competition or simply shielding the FIA from future criticism. And the most worrying thing is that if no one raises their voice forcefully, this could be just the beginning of a more controlled, more rigid F1, and much less exciting. Putting the Brazil incident into context requires looking back at McLaren's meteoric rise from the latter part of 2023 to its current dominance. The Woking team has done the unthinkable. In just 2 seasons, it went from being an intermittent team to one of the absolute references in the championship. And he did it through a meticulous process, without media hype, led with a surgical hand by Piastri Stella. In qualifying, the Australian has been clinical. Its ability to get the most out of cold tires in changing conditions has impressed even its detractors. But where it really shines is in handling the car in traffic. His style, which combines controlled aggression with an outstanding reading of the environment, has led McLaren to allow him greater tactical freedom during races. And that degree of autonomy is not given to a team that fights for titles. You win. That's why what happened in Brazil hurts more. Because it wasn't just a sanction. It was a blow to the confidence of a driver who was building his narrative as a serious title contender. And for McLaren, what happened threatens to upset a delicate psychological balance they have worked on for months. With 2 drivers at the highest level, any external interference such as a sanction that the team itself considers unfair can generate internal friction, strategic doubts, or even changes in hierarchy on the track. Leave us your opinion, what you think about all this.